serpents, ye offspring of vipers, how can he escape the damnation of hell? Wherefore, behold, I send to your prophets and wise men and scribes, and some of them ye shall kill and crucify, and some of them ye shall scourge in your synagogues and persecute them from city to city, that upon you.
Hello, good morning, and welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. My name is Paul Strangini, and we've been going through the woes, the 8 woes. There are 8. And, you know, since it is often, well, in some places I've heard it suggested that there's a correlation between the woes and the Beatitudes, and I can see some correlation in the fact that there are 8 each. It may be worth a comparison. It's just something to think about as we go through. It also provides a kind of a pathway for further thought. And I thought I left off on that a little bit. First we had the first woe was, they shut up the kingdom of heaven against men. They neither go in themselves, neither suffer ye them that are entering to go in, that are going in. And then, so people are shut out of the kingdom, whereas in the Beatitude, the poor in spirit are welcomed into it. The second Beatitude was, happy are they that mourn. The second woe was, you devour widows' houses. A widow is a prototypical type of a mourner, someone who has had a loss. And instead of comforting those that mourn, they are rather taking advantage of them and, you know, sort of malevolently descending on their property and taking away even that which they already have. Excuse me. And then the third was, what was the third woe? I'm thinking of the last one, actually, and I think I need to think of the next one. Well, the next Beatitude is the meek, yes. And see, this is a good way to be able to remember it, actually, because now I remember the next woe is sort of the opposite. The twofold more the child of hell. Remember, I talked about when someone is made into a convert, they often are the type of people who become very zealous for their newly found faith or lack thereof. If you get some, like I said, people who convert from Christianity to atheism are some of the most vehement, often, not always. I mean, certainly there's plenty of vehement, not, but it can have that sort of effect. Sometimes they go quietly off, but people have noticed there is I don't know if it's an idiom, but it is definitely a thing where people will speak of the zeal of a proselyte or the zeal of a convert. It can certainly increase their zeal. And zeal can lead to a lack of self-control. And we talked about being controlled in the way we behave towards people. When we go out to make proselytes, we should be, teaching them to use restraint, meekness. So the meekness beatitude can be seen to answer to the one about making proselytes. And then the last one we just had was, it answers to, they that hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they should be filled. But they're neglecting the weightier matter. They're so caught up not in righteousness, like they're tithing the tiniest things, the mint, the anise, and the cumin. They, to establish this sort of false righteousness. Look at all, I tithe a little bit of everything. I mean, I didn't even forget to tithe my mint. You got a little mint plant out there, and you pluck the leaves, and you set aside a tenth for God. And according to the law, that's what they should have been doing. But they totally neglected the weightier matters of the law: judgment, mercy, and faith, which are really the three critical aspects of righteousness. And so they're more worried about tithing their food than being hungry for doing that which is right in the sight of God. And now we come to the next one. They may clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. And of course that answers in the Beatitudes to, what is it? Merciful. Wait, did I get thrown off there? Are we at the fourth one? The meek? Yeah. They shall obtain mercy. They feel trouble. Within they are full of extortion and excess. Well, extortion is an obvious opposite to mercy. But let's step away from that for a second. Let's just analyze this here, because it's not all about the comparison. I said it's more of an amusing side issue. Maybe not amusing, but a point of interest along the way. Here we have the scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you make clean. Remember we talked about a hypocrite is. It's someone who acts under false sort of pretenses. They've got this outward religious show going on, but he describes their hypocrisy through these woes. And saying, God sees what's going on for real here. You're not, and just the previous verse 24, it sort of sums up the thoughts behind all of this. I think you strain at a gnat and swallow a camel is sort of like a very good overview that occurs kind of right at the center of all the woes. You blind guides, you strain at a gnat, and strain at is a single, which strain at a is not at a. Strain at is more like strain out. I think I just assumed that would be understood. It means you filter out the small things. You're paying attention to very insignificant details. You're so worried about swallowing a gnat, but at the same time, it's a ridiculous thing. Just swallow a camel. It's hype. Don't tell me Jesus doesn't use hyperbole. It's not literal camel swallowing going on here. He's using hyperbole. He's exaggerating to prove a point, because it is a big deal what they've done. They've neglected judgment, mercy, and faith. You may clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but within they are full of extortion and excess. Outwardly they look righteous to men. In fact, that's what he says. You appear outwardly righteous to men, but within you are full of, well, actually, that's what happens in the next one. You indeed appear outwardly righteous in verse 28. So I'm sort of using that because these two seem very similar to me. Sorry. Let me read this one and the next one, and then I'll try to differentiate them a little bit, because I think it's sort of, you have to hold both, one in each hand, to be able to derive some sort of differentiation between them, because they seem very similar. It says, they make clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, the plate and cup, but within, the inside, the interior, they are full of extortion and excess. Thou blind Pharisee, cleanse first that which is within the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also. A very clear analogy. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and of all uncleanness. Even so ye also outwardly appear righteous unto men, but within ye are full of hypocrisy and iniquity. So I think the differentiation is sort of, the first one, it's a call to do this first. It's about how they approach their own, how they approach themselves. The analogy seems very clear to me. You got a cup, you clean the outside, but not the inside. And this, harkens back to something Jesus said in earlier chapters, where he said, nothing going into a man defiles him, but that which comes out of a man. He's always very concerned about what is going on in our hearts. So I said, people who say, like the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet anything that belongs to your neighbor, is somehow not, not really a sin because there's no actual action. Like, it's okay. This attitude pervades many people. They think, oh, I remember I had a Christian friend, his wife said, well, he can look, but he can't touch, speaking of women. That's completely unacceptable. That's not how it works. You don't say, I can look, but I can't touch. It's good that you don't touch, but no, you can't look either. It's not, and look was with, some sort of, it's not just something that enters into the eye, but something that enters into the heart. And it was clear to me that they did not mean, when you differentiate it like that, say, oh, look but not touch. You're implying that there is, like everything up to the point where they're starting to touch is acceptable. Whereas there's a wide range of looking that is not acceptable. And that's what the law says. And in Christianity, it certainly strengthens that aspect of the law, because in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus makes it very clear, that it's not just a murderer who is in danger of hellfire, but the one who calls his brother a fool is also in danger of hellfire. And it is not just the one who has lain with a woman who commits adultery, but anyone who looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery already with her in his heart. It's not the same as adultery, but it is also sinful. It is unacceptable. Whereas they would say, no, it's okay, and that's wrong. And he's saying, you got to get your insides straightened out. That should be your first concern. It's not saying like, okay, just do whatever. And then, like meaning like, well, do murder, do that, but be concerned about how you're thinking about it. He's not saying that, but what he's saying is that should be your first priority, is the inner. The outer is not as high a priority as the inner, because everything you're doing outwardly is manifesting from something inside of you that's wrong, about the way you think, about the way you put ideas together, about the way you look at the world, the way you perceive the world is suboptimal. It's not right. It's sinful. That's the easiest way to say it. You're not, because what sin means in the Greek, hamarteo, means literally to miss the mark. Okay, it means literally to miss the mark. And so you think about it. It has to do with your aim. What are you trying to accomplish by looking? Because when you point your eyes at something, that's a very critical part of how you are, orienting yourself to that object. It's like if you're looking at it with lust in your heart, that's your aim, is lust. You're aiming, and you're aiming at something in terms of lust, it's like you're not pointed properly at righteousness. It's, like if your aim is righteousness, the way you look at things in the world is different. Your aim is different. Your eyes are looking at something else. It's like when, I remember when I first started my very first Bible study, there were females that came into the Bible study, but I was so focused on the Word that even when my wife came in, my first thought was just in terms of, is this person a serious student? Is this person someone who's worth teaching, spending time? I looked at them purely as a student, not as an object of sexual interest. None of the women that came into my study was like very focused, especially in that context. I can't say it was perfect outwardly. I mean, eventually I definitely noticed my wife at some point, right? It was probably after she asked me to hug her. No, I'm just kidding. But the issue of like inward attention, it's important. Yeah, and it's the hardest thing. But you have to take. If you don't try to do the utmost to be the most righteous, you won't get anywhere near the ideal standard. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you say like, well, I just want to be as righteous as Paul, you're going to fall way short of God. We all fall short of the glory of God. But if we're aiming at Him, at perfection, at the highest ideal of a clean mind, of a pure mind, and those are the two things, the first one here with they're full of extortion. I guess extortion, you could say, because it says happy are the merciful. And I was just, extortion is some sort of thing. See, in their hearts, instead of meditating on mercy or faith or judgment, the judgment of God, the righteousness of God, all the things that accompany godliness, their meditation is on extortion. Extortion is taking, through threat, money from people. And I could compare all kinds of church to extortion, okay? Because there is a sort of implicit threat. If you don't tithe, you're sinning. If you aren't in church on Saturday, Sunday, whatever. It's a sin. And you know what sins do? Well, they take you to hell. Therefore, you better be in church. You better pay your tithes. And if you don't, we're going to lay a sense of guilt and of you haven't met your obligations. You haven't met your obligations. You haven't done what you needed to do. And God isn't happy with you. Look at a televangelist. Tell me if you don't see a cleaner outward appearance. Nice light-colored suit. They always wear like light tan. Sometimes they wear dark, but I'm just thinking of like Benny Hinn, man. That guy always wore like a white suit all the time. And brilliant as far as shaping people's perceptions. White suit, nice hair, nice shoes, dressed nice. Looking outwardly clean. Even my appearance can be seen in that vein, because I can see the ways in which people can be manipulated all kinds of ways. It's like, look at him, he's just an average guy. Like if I was trying to if this was some sort of put on. Because I could put on a suit. It'd be weird because that's not what I do every day, but it's like, and there's nothing wrong with wearing a suit. Nothing wrong at all. It's fine. But the thing is, what is it being used for, and what is it coming out of? They're inwardly, all their thought is, I want to get money out of these people, and I want to spend it on myself, on excess. So the televangelists and such people, they're loaded with money. They live, multi-millionaire lifestyles. They have private jets. They go jetting around the country and around the world. And a lot of time they do very good things, charities and stuff, but there's an excess to their lifestyle. I don't actually know what all of them do. But I know this, that because it's in the Word here, it's probably, because money is a form of power and it corrupts. When you get all this money coming in, I'm sure there are some guys out there who are bringing all kinds of money that are absolutely living it in a righteous way. Or at least I want to believe that there are certainly Christians who can handle that kind of blessing and yet maintain their integrity, not be corrupted by it. But it is certainly something that is, you can get caught up in. Like, you start getting money and then you're like, well, how can I get more? I mean, I want money, not for this, but I want to earn money in my business. I want to prosper. There are things I want to do. Mostly just not get kicked out of my house. Mostly things that are not big deals. Some that are big deals. I want to put siding on my barn. I want to do other nice things for my family. I don't think about, honestly, it doesn't go much. When I think of the excesses I'd like to do, it's like yeah, I want to fix up things around my home, But we should not look to use, when ministries use any form of fear or I am very, very skeptical of any ministry that insists on tithing, of any ministry that really makes, that they're on TV or something, and giving is like just a really big part about it. They're always asking for donations. Even the ministry I started off studying, Arnold Murray, everyone thinks he's such a saint with money and all that. He doesn't even like talking about money. Nobody sure loved talking about how much he didn't like talking about money. And he sure loved talking about how he didn't beg for donations. It's like so much virtue signaling, it almost boggles the mind. But back then, we didn't even understand. I never heard of the idea of virtue signaling, where someone's just sort of spouting off their virtue. It's hard not to do it sometimes, especially when you're teaching and stuff. You're talking about subjects. You start bringing yourself into it. And because this study is, this is like cause it's kind of like a video blog. I'm just talking to the computer, essentially. I don't see anybody. I don't, like if I go over here, I go check the questions. No questions. There's no chat going on. It's very quiet. I know there are people watching. I know upstairs Katie's watching. And that's all I really need to keep doing the study. but it becomes, I hear Jesus say something, I want to analyze myself. I examine myself. It's right to examine yourself. Say, am I right with the word? And I only do it, when I talk about it, I'm not trying to signal virtue. I'm sort of analyzing myself on the fly. Am I aligning myself properly with what the word says? And that's a good thing to do. So I don't mind, bringing myself into certain questions as to how I felt about it. Like when I talked about I wasn't looking at women. That's not really meant to signal my virtue so much as it is to use an example of how one may look at things differently. You're looking at a person as a person who is interested in the gospel, and and that is the object they become. They become like this sort of human being who is seeking God, instead of looking at them as some sort of objective something else. It's like the same thing with the way we look at, like looking at people and thinking like, I wonder how much they could afford to give to my ministry. Looking at people like that, or wondering, you're teaching and you have this big group and you're just thinking like, wow, I'm going to be able to do so much because with such a large multitude, I mean, God knows how much money I could take in, and that sort of mentality. They're not thinking about judgment, mercy, and faith of blessing the poor or anything like that. They're just mostly concerned with extortion and excess. Now, comparison to the next one. Now, we cleanse first the inside. We covered that sufficiently, I think. And then this one, you are like whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones and all uncleanness. He's saying you're like a cup that's clean on the outside and dirty on the inside. And here he's saying a little different aspect of it. You are like whited sepulchres. A sepulchre, what does that symbolically represent? Because a cup and a platter sort of represents food and drink and the mondacities of everyday life, right? Your cup and your platter. You eat off the platter, you drink out of the cup, and it's filthy. That means your daily walk is just this filthy thing. And being a whited sepulchre is a reference to the past, because a grave is always, that's the past. I don't know how else to say it. It's a whited place it's a tomb. Someone used to be alive, and now they're dead and buried inside the sepulchre. And it's like, outwardly they paint them and they're beautiful. Perhaps, they can be beautiful anyways, right? There's a mausoleum in town, not far from where I live, and I always look at it, I'm like, that's a beautiful building. But the purpose of it is to contain the remains of the dead, the decomposing remains of men's corpses, human beings rotting away, and the very bacteria devouring their flesh, because that's the primary thing that causes decomposition is the bacteria that lives within your body just multiplying out of control. So outward they appear beautiful. Yeah. So it can be this beautiful structure on the outside, but within it's got dead men's bones and all uncleanness. And I think that may be, and this answers to the pure of heart. Actually, that would feel better on the last one, right? The pure of heart. Happy are the pure of heart, for they shall see God. Here we have, though, they have something else within them, corruption. Not pureness, corruption. Uncleanness is the opposite of purity. Holiness answers to profanity, meaning that which is common. There's nothing more common than death. It is the most profane thing of all. So they are filled inside their heart, not with pureness, but with profanity. I just want to cross-check something. So anyways, but it also says they shall see God. And here we have rather the grave. Instead of seeing God, you're seeing death. In him is life, everlasting life, forevermore. life and pureness and godliness forevermore, versus a tomb filled with dead men's bones. I think there may also be some sort of symbolic reference to the idea that, they're built up on the, like if I were to look at a denomination, it's like Lutheranism. Now, you understand that the Lutheran church, there's no Lutheran church. There's many Lutheran churches. This is something I didn't understand. There's we got the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. We've got the whatever other, they're splintered into liberal and conservative factions. And I don't know much about the specifics of each one, because I remember the Missouri Synod, I mentioned that only because I remember when I was much younger, a friend of mine showed me this piece of paper that some guy had given him, that it basically traced all the splintering denominations down to the true church, which is the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Okay, and I don't have much to say beyond that, but just like they saw themselves as that. But there are all these other versions of the Lutheran Church, and usually the last one that's split off from you is the most hated, as far as the scene is the most corrupt. Like there was a group, you may have heard Herbert W. Armstrong in the Worldwide Church of God. I know some people who stay with me are very familiar with Herbert W. Armstrong. I have a couple of publications my dad got from him years ago, and I remember I learned a bit about it, and mostly because I was interested in the splinter groups that came up after he died, because his adopted son was not seen to be carrying on the ministry the way he would have, which was basically, I don't want to get into the specifics of what they believed, but there was another group who, after he died, became zealously devoted to him and believed that he was the end times Elijah, because he had suggested so in his lifetime. He had begun to suggest, because he had done so much to build up this worldwide Church of God. It was a big movement, a big ministry, and he had definitely set out a lot of doctrines. A lot of them borrowed from a lot of it was like sort of Anglo-Israelite type stuff. That's one, and then sort of like a cross between that and sort of some of the, I don't want to get too specific because I don't want to, but there was like this the splinter group that was really hung up on him, and I got some of their free literature in my library somewhere here, or maybe I think I put them in a box and they're away somewhere because didn't need it. They thought of him as the end times Elijah, and the people they had the most antipathy towards were the people who remained in the Worldwide Church of God and endured the changes that were brought about after Armstrong's death. Okay, now what am I getting at with all that? Well, like, the thing is, they're all hung up on this dead guy. They're filled with dead men's bones, dead men's doctrines. Now, it's not, there can be truth in someone who's, like Luther had really important points to make. And he gets to it in the next one also, because they build the tombs of the prophets. They build themselves up on things done by others, on the dead. Their authority comes from the dead. They take the dead corpses, and that's the foundation on which their entire authority is resting, on which their doctrine is resting. And there's something corrupt about it. So that's how I see it. As far as I do believe that there's something. It is, like we're naming our churches after these dudes. And Paul kind of talked about this. One saith, I am of Paul. The other say, I am of Apollos, and I'm ashamed of you. I don't seek to build a church. And I would be really ticked off if after I was dead, there was like some, where did Paul? It's disgusting. You should be, I want to teach people to be Christians and how to obtain the promises which God has ordained that we could partake of through the gospel. It's like my aim is to instruct you. And that, not to build up a house to hold my bones so that you can be corrupted by all my mistakes. You know what I mean? Because I think about it. I was listen to my most recent teachings. It's probably the best because it's like I keep moving. And you don't know where I'm going to end up. And maybe you won't like it. So don't put your trust in me. And I don't want to lead anyone astray, but gee, it's like I've been astray before. What are the chances that could happen again? You got to be on the ball. I try to be on the ball. I mean, it's fine. I know people listen and they feel like they want to listen and continue listening. Fine. But listen with open ears, with open eyes. It's like, I know there are some people who there's always plenty of people. There's opposition no matter where you go. No matter what you teach. There's nothing you can teach that's going to be universally accepted. You know what I mean? And the fact that just the things I say about hell, the things I say about death are very unpopular. With some people it's popular. It's not like nobody believes those things. It's not like I'm just out here. I don't think there's anything I teach, at least that would be considered controversial, that isn't taught by other people. I think there are things I teach that are kind of unique, but they're not controversial. They're just sort of neglected. I just think that I teach some things that are neglected, not so much that are, like in hearing them, it shouldn't be controversial. Maybe it is in some circles, because they've neglected the weightier matters of the law, judgment, mercy, and faith. They're talking about little tenth of issues. And it's not just tithing. That's symbolic. Straining the gnat, swallowing the camel. It's like, hey, here's what we'll swallow. I'm going to swallow the camel. We're all sinners, and we're going to be sinners in a somewhat equal level. We're going to sin every day for the rest of our lives. And that it's okay. And that's okay. That's fine. You don't have to strive against it. There's no need to do that because you're forgiven. So just, I don't know, come to church and tithe. That'll suffice. And then you go to heaven because you believe. Don't, there's no reason for you to change. Oh, now, that's not something that's often said, right? People want people to change. But they're sort of, like I said, their aim is off. That's why they keep on sinning. And all the way to the end. That's why the doctrine is just a sinful doctrine. It's not like there's encouragement to righteousness it's just not there. Because I think they're fearful of it making people feel bad. But yet they're not rather fearful of making them feel bad about not tithing. They're not fearful about making them feel bad about, the pastor not making enough money or whatever. That's not something you should be afraid of making people feel bad about. They're so afraid that people, I'm so afraid people won't be able to fulfill the righteousness which God demands, so I won't preach to them about it. But I'm not at all afraid if preaching the tithe is going to put a burden on their life and on their family and on their financial situation. I'm not worried about that at all. About making them feel guilty about not giving enough money to the ministry. No, that doesn't trouble me one bit. But I am very troubled, Paul, at the way you insist on righteousness and holiness and godliness as being a goal for Christians. The thing is, you just got to be aiming at it. I mean, you may not achieve perfect righteousness and Christ-likeness. You're not going to ultimately achieve that till you are raised from the dead. As far as, because your body is itself, it needs to be changed, right? But have you resisted sin to the shedding of blood yet? Well, that's within your grasp. Resist sin. Aim at Christ. And whenever you find yourself deviating, you got to reorient yourself so you're pointed in the right direction. Up to the one, up to the center. That's why I make this shape. I'm pointing. There is examples along the way. There are people who are maybe ahead of us in their walk. We look up to them. You don't aim at them. You don't aim at Martin Luther. You don't aim at Calvin, John Calvin. You don't aim at the Apostle Paul or Peter. You aim at Christ. That is the example. He is the ultimate example of how we ought to be in the world and how we ought to behave, or at least in his teachings and in the teachings of the apostles about what that meant. It doesn't mean you get to act like Christ whenever you please. You know what I mean? Like you thinking like, oh, I can just kick the dust in people's face because I'm Christ-like. You gotta have the right context to that before you start doing that. All right, my back hurts. Study mode. We're at the halfway point, and that's when I say, please subscribe to Line by Line Bible Studies. Please, if you like, click on the like button. It is just below the lower right of the screen. If you have a question, this is all linked in the description below. If you have a question and you don't want to put it in the chat, you can send it to questions@oraclesofgod.org. I haven't checked that since yesterday, and I'll just pop over there real quick just in case there's something to do with this recent study. See, if you have a question about this study, you can sorry. You can send it to that address. Nope, nothing. Okay, good. That is just fine. Let's get back to the study. So if you have a question about this study, you can put it into the chat. You can put it into the comments. But YouTube does not do a good job of notifying me of comments. So, it's like it's not reliable. The most reliable way is going to be to send me a message at questions@oraclesofgod.org. And because eventually that'll get seen, if not right away. But I try to check the chat in the middle, like right now I'm checking it, and you can even see it coming up there and overlapping one of my other windows, and there's nothing there. And I should check like about 5 minutes before we finish up. I gotta remember to do that, so I don't always remember to do it. Okay, so they're full of dead men's bones. There's something about the dead that is in them. They're filled with this unclean, they're like containers for the past and for not that all that is past, but it's like, the kingdom of heaven is like a householder. I forgot who goes in and brings forth things new and old. I forgot the exact context of that. He's got not just old things, but new things. It's not, here's the thing about Christianity that's kind of weird. Like Jesus talked about new wineskins, being new wineskins. And also we have this idea that the Spirit of God has to inhabit us. The entire truth of God is not contained in any denominational statement of faith. On my website I have a statement of faith, and I purposefully kept it very limited. I wanted to keep it to things that I thought wouldn't change. I don't even think in my statement of faith, I didn't put anything about like what happens when you die and things that I didn't think were necessary. I put in the most necessary ideas of Christianity. I didn't even get into the discussion of what I thought hell was, because it's a complex subject. But I do believe in a final punishment, an ultimate punishment, which is the end of all judgment for that individual. So I put that in, that God is going to judge the world, because that is a belief Christians have. You got to believe that because it helps us understand that everything we do matters. Everything we do is significant. I didn't put anything about like determinism or free will, because the interplay between my absolute belief in God's determinate counsel and foreknowledge is also everything I believe about that is sort of distinct from our subjective experience. Because as I've said, while I believe in God's deterministic model of the world, because that's what the New Testament is a deterministic writing. You can't escape that. I mean, people do, but I think it's intellectually dishonest, just because they don't like it. I think they think the scriptures took a wrong turn or something. But it does not void the idea of our subjective experience is one of free will. Meaning, in our subjective experience, we don't experience any sort of deterministic thing. This is like we feel totally untethered. And I think that perception for our all subjective purposes within ourselves, that is a true perception. I mean, it's not, I think I have called it an illusion, like free will is a bit of an illusion. But all consciousness then could be considered an illusion. All our perception of the world could be considered an illusion. I mean, like just because my senses tell me this is real and solid, well, it could all be an illusion. For every practical purpose, it is not an illusion. For every practical purpose, our subjective free will is not an illusion. But that does not, maybe it's paradoxical, but God's perception of the world is purely objective and completely deterministic. Like he sees the world in a very deterministic, all he sees is his plans and how it's going to turn out. That's what he sees. Because being God, he sees the operation of everything. He is omniscient, omnipresent. We are not, so there's no deterministic. If we had those things, then we could see the world in a deterministic way. But we're not, so it's unhinged. It's off the rails. That's how it feels from our perspective. That's off the topic, but throwing it out there. Why? Why did I have that? No reason. Just because I was interested. Well, I remember why now. Because it's like, don't go to rest on my dead bones. You know what I mean? Don't build a sepulchre around my corpse and say, oh, the purpose in Christianity, in all mankind, there's always this desire to take our forefathers and build a beautiful tomb for them and whitewash it. And well, then everything was going badly. Then Martin Luther came around and he straightened everything out. Everything got perfected under him. And now we build a tomb around his bones and they're sacred and we name our buildings after him. We name this after him. That the whole church is named after him. Because he came along and he set everything straight. It's like in my lifetime, I've spent a lot of time with the scriptures. It is not my primary occupation. You gotta understand, I'm a lay person. I did not study this in college. Though while I was in college, I started studying the Bible, but not as part of a curriculum. I'm mostly self-taught. Mostly taught from teaching. Mostly taught from remeditating on the scriptures, going over them. Not like I don't sit around all day going over the scriptures and over. I can't do it. I've got 8 children. I have work and thought when I can find it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's a struggle. It's a struggle. There's a struggle through life. But as much as I can, that's why I like to do this morning study, because it just keeps me in the Word every day. But I've been doing studies for years. I've been meditating on these things for years, and I have the Spirit of God. And I tell you, it's like getting it. There's no bottom to God's word. There's no at the bottom of it is God. And what do you mean by the bottom? What are you talking about? When you dig down through all the words and all the teachings and stuff. My wife was marveling how I was at the end of the study, and I said I was over, and then I just went on for another 5 minutes, and I had more to say. This is something God has given me. Maybe I'm an example of this, but there is no end to what you can say about what's in it. There's no end. God is infinite. So at the bottom of all this is an infinite being which you cannot fathom. So don't tell me that John Calvin was the end of everything and Martin Luther was the end of everything. Because I think what they think is there's some sort of vanity of, on my part, or on any other person's part, who thinks we can introduce some sort of novelty to a religion that is 2,000 years old, nearly so. Christianity is, whether you mark it out, If you go back 2,000 years, Jesus had not yet begun his ministry. That's where we are. So Christianity is not quite 2,000 years old. We're at the 1990s, actually, from the time of the ministry. That's why I feel like we're heading into a very tumultuous time. 1,000 years after Christianity, they were expecting something, and things happened. Things got weird. Study that. I mean, it was just the plague and all this. I mean, they thought it was the end of the world, right? There's no reason we can't have some real big trouble and it not be the end of the world. But trouble, I think, is coming. Crisis is coming. I hate that I said that. Not because I regret it, but because I don't like being right when it comes to things like that. So, there is no bottom. There's no time. Don't build the tomb around the bones because it becomes unclean. It's just going to rot. It's going to stink. What are you doing? Luther, it's like he did good, like take what he did and build on it into Christ. You know what I mean? Build on the good and on the right into something that's truly beautiful and clean and pure. They appear outwardly right. Now you say, Paul, what's that got to do with what he says here? He says hypocrisy and iniquity. Well, there is an hypocrisy and all that. It's like some man did some good things, brought forth some truth, and they build up on it and create a structure that is iniquity, ultimately, because it's just relying on it's exalting men above their station, above their merit. Not that we can't learn from and honor our forefathers, you know what I mean? But with the appropriate measure. Again, so they appear outwardly righteous to men. It seems like a good thing. It seems like a right thing, But inside, it's a corruption. Inside they're corrupt. They're hypocritical. They are full of iniquity. Iniquity, what's the word for iniquity? I feel like I know what iniquity means. Anomia, lawlessness. Maybe drink a coffee. Oh, it's not hot. I like my symbolic interpretation of that, but because here's the thing: when Jesus speaks in such general terms, and here's the thing, it's not like this is just coming out of nowhere. There is precedent in the Old Testament prophets for the things I'm saying about, and he gets to, you build the tombs of the prophets, you garnish the sepulchres of the righteous. I'm looking forward somewhat. I guess I'm getting self-conscious about well, right here he says, this is, nice job, Paul. Right here he says, he says this is his take on it. But I think it fits. It's fine. We put on this outward show of righteousness, this outward show of religious, structured, upright, good. But inside is something dead and unclean and filthy. And maybe that's what I don't like about church. There's something that feels like at the bottom of it is unclean. And I don't know. I don't. It's not like I go around sampling churches every weekend to get a good sample. I've just always had bad experiences. That it goes bad after a while. And I say, well, maybe it's you. Maybe it is me. I mean, I have no doubt it is me in part because I certainly don't accept things that go on. I try to, if there's a problem, I try to follow what the Lord taught As far as like, if you got a problem with someone, go tell them. If they won't hear you, go bring 1 or 2 witnesses. If they won't hear them, tell it to the church. If they won't hear them, then let them be unto you as a heathen man and a publican. And so that means like, oh, I guess I got to leave. So I guess that's a very straightforward verse. They appear beautiful outward. They appear righteous outward. It seems like they're righteous. These are the righteous men of God. It says in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, or is it 11? I'm kind of annoyed that or is it 10 verse 11? Is that why I got 11 in my head? I just want to know. Sorry. So this study just got boring real fast. No, it's 11:10, I bet. No. 11:12. Yeah. I knew it was a sequential thing like that. 11 verse 12. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into the apostles of Christ. And no marvel, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness, whose end shall be according to their works. They transform themselves outwardly. They appear to be the ministers of righteousness. I said they get the white suit on, or they put on the robes of the clergy, and they stand up there in front of everybody and tell them all that there is to know about God. But really they're just a tomb for some dead man's bones who maybe was a good man, but all now he is a stinking pile of corruption. Because that's what all men turn into stinking piles of corruption and bones. That's what's left, both literally and symbolically. You get too hung up on people, especially on the dead, and it begins to rot. And you should not. You should be looking to Christ, looking to his Spirit. His Spirit is alive. It's what the Spirit that motivated and taught Martin Luther. You know, it's like that same Spirit that is motivating and teaching us, because it's God. He is the Spirit. And therefore, you know, we have access directly to the Father through the Spirit of God. So why will we put some man between us and him? Not that you can't learn from men, but we rely primarily on the Spirit of God. And, you know, and then part of that is like right now, the Spirit of God is alive in me. And when I'm talking now, this is live, this is real. You know what I mean? And when the Spirit speaks through me, it is for right now. But, you know, someday I'll be dead, or the world will be over, one or the other, right? For me, it'll be no practical difference. But the Spirit of God won't be speaking through dead me. You know, not for the time to come. It'll be speaking maybe in the past and maybe have something to say that's worth listening to. But it would be an error to just rely on that without looking to the Spirit right then and there, because he's alive. And isn't the truth eternal? Yes, it is. But maybe for the moment you're in, something else has to be emphasized. You know, it's like I get blinded by all the issues of my day, all the things of my existence that are surrounding me and making me perceive the world in a particular way, and thinking that this is the most necessary thing to talk about right now. Like Luther said a lot about indulgences. The giving of indulgences, he had a lot of criticism of the Catholic Church, which are most of them don't even apply anymore, because that's all done. They eliminated indulgences, and there's a lot of stuff that just is history. Nothing wrong with studying it and knowing about it. You should know about it. You should know that he nailed his 95 Theses to the Wittenberg church door, and there should be some sort of knowledge of what was in the 95 Theses. I don't know all of them. There was a lot, but there was a lot of corruption in the church at that time, in the Catholic Church, capital C. Because it's not like there wasn't a Greek Orthodox church, and I don't know what was going on over there, really. Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, because you build the tombs of the prophets and garnish the sepulchres of the righteous. and say, if we had been in the days of our fathers, we would not have been partakers with them in the blood of the prophets. You know, and I've been mostly focusing on Christianity and our history and the more recent past. Of course, Jesus this is directed all at the Jews of his day, not the Jews, because remember, Jesus is a Jew, his apostles are Jews, but it was the religious leaders of that time, which he saw as corrupt and leading the people astray, and which, you know, they gave honor to the prophets and say, you know, we wouldn't have been, you know, it's like you know, it's this vanity people have, you know, like they think like, well, if I'd been living in Nazi Germany, I'd be like Schindler. I'd start rescuing Jews because I'm so full of virtue. You know, if I was living in Nazi Germany when they were doing that, I would be hiding them in my basement, and I would never participate in the blood of the Jews. It's an interesting way to take this idea. I would not have been part of that until you've actually exposed yourself to some sort of temptation like that, where, you know, the whole country's going off and doing things. You don't know what you would have done unless you've been in similar circumstances and gone against the crowd. You have no idea how hard that is. Because most likely, if I was raised in Nazi Germany, I would have been a Nazi. And that's something people don't want to face about themselves. That the world around you can do a lot to corrupt you. You know, you most likely, you know why you say it most likely? Because that's what most people were doing. Most people were not. Unless you think you're just exceedingly exceptional. I would like to think I wouldn't be like that. I'm just saying, based on the law of averages of what, you know, I don't know. I haven't been tested enough in my life where I could say, like, yeah, you know what? And when push came to shove, when it was time to sacrifice my life so that somebody else could live, I was willing to lay my life down. So you can say that, because that's what it takes. You're risking your life for other people, strangers, foreigners. You know, the people who are not, you know, the Jews were not Germans. They were Germans, though. That's the terrible part, is that they were so Germanized. I mean, they thought of themselves as Germans, even though they were ethnically and religiously Jewish. You know, they thought of, many of them fought in the First World War for Germany because that was their nation, just like Jews fought for America in the wars, the world wars. They weren't disloyal to their country. You know, and you know, they have another loyalty also to their people, which is unique among nations, because they still have that. Like, you know, I feel like, you know, Italy to me is like, and I'm as much German as I am Italian, so you know, I'm not. So it's like, but I'm just saying I have an Italian name, so one might assume that I have some affinity for Italy. But really, to me, it's just like, it's like a team I like in another city. I used to follow sports, you know, and so I was a fan of the Chicago sports teams, right? But then, you know, there are other cities that have teams that you like. You know, like, oh, I kind of like the Rockets or something. You know, the Houston Rockets. I like them. I kind of like that team. Or someone might like the Cowboys. I have a friend who likes the Cowboys. But he's not, you know, but he lives in Chicago. But he kind of likes that team too, you know. And that's how I feel about it. It's like a team in another city. It's not my team. My team is this place. I like that one. I have relatives, or I have some affinity or some relationship to that. Why am I saying that? Oh, well, you know, because people's loyalties. They are I was commenting on the Jews' loyalty to Germany. And I think I blew out my mind in the beginning of the study. The first half was just like boom, boom, boom. And it's not that I don't have anything to say. It's just I'm sort of going far afield. But the point was about we think we are not capable of doing the evil we read about maybe in the scriptures or in history. But it is so very important for us to recognize that we are capable of, if you're capable of, like Jesus says, if you say to your brother, thou fool, if you say raka, if you are angry without some sort of righteous cause. He said without a cause. Okay, let's say without a righteous cause. Without, and then if you're angry and sinning not. Because you can like you hear a child got raped. It's okay to be angry about it. You know what I mean? It's like that's wrong. It makes me angry. It makes me boil within. That's all right. But that guy just slighted me. I'm angry. That goes back to, remember Cain's first. Was his first? Was it Tubal Cain? Yeah, I think it was two. I forgot which one. It was one of Cain's descendants said, a man wounded me and I killed him. So if Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, I shall be avenged 7 times sevenfold, or 70, because, hey, that guy hurt me and I killed him. He wounded me, I killed him. Because Cain killed a man for nothing, except for being good, essentially. We think, oh, we wouldn't do that. Well, check your heart. Examine yourself. Where are your petty jealousies? Where are your petty hatreds? Where are your petty, things? Because there's, like I said, there's righteous jealousy. There is. God is a jealous God. He's not envious. It's different. If I were to talk about like the way I feel about my wife or the way she feels about me, it's not envy. It's zeal for the one that belongs to you. That's that kind of. I don't. In a marriage, you ought to be possessive of your spouse, not to the point where it becomes some sort of ridiculous caricature of not whatever it is. Like, I want to be able to say stuff without having to qualify every single word. So let's just let that go out. Let's say within, in a reasonable way. And some people, you say something like that and they're like, all right, we gotta lock her up in the well, keep my wife locked up in the attic. That's the way I'll keep her in the right way. But no, we have in our hearts all kinds of corrupt things. And we think we're better than the people we read about in history, in the Bible. Until you've been tested, don't be too boastful. It's a warning. You say, oh, well, if I had been in the days of the prophets, I would not. If I had been in the days of Jesus, I wouldn't have been with that crowd yelling, crucify him. Give us Barabbas. I wouldn't have been. If I had been in the days of Jesus, I wouldn't have denied him like Peter. I would have gone to the cross with Jesus. If I had been on the water with Jesus, I wouldn't have doubted. I would have been like, look at, I'm walking on the water, and it's Jesus. But we live our lives so unexamined, and then we go around. I mean, I don't know how many times I run into Christians, and they start trying to, argue with me about something, and how quickly they become so judgmental. And so, I won't say hateful, but using rhetoric that is like, it's in the area of calling people fool, and then no thought of like what they're doing, no thought of the path they are walking down. It's frightening. Oh, I'm actually past the hour. Look at that. I did my full hour. Wherefore ye be witnesses unto yourselves that ye are the children of them which killed the prophets. I don't think he means, like, it's not that, they meant it biologically, though that's fine. People often get caught up in the biology. Like I said, oh, they're direct descendants, because that's not, it was already said in the Old Testament that, the children do not pay for the sins of their fathers unless they continue in the same things, right? But being related to someone does not convey guilt over time. I was trying to think if there's a word, not collective guilt, but sort of like inherited guilt. You don't inherit guilt from your fathers. You don't. Now, you may inherit ways of thinking, modes of operating, and then you fill up your own measure, so to speak. Like it says, fill ye up then the measure of your fathers. If you do the works of your fathers, you will obtain the same result, which is God being angry. You're going to kill the prophets. They killed him, so he was right. If we had been in the days of our fathers, we wouldn't have done what they did. And he's saying, you're witness to yourselves that you are their disciples. You know that you have, that you have come down from that. You already see yourself like, because honestly, I don't ever think like, I don't put myself and say, oh, if I had been in Nazi Germany, what would I do? I've never really thought on what I would do, because I don't know what it would be like to be confronted with that. I've thought more of future, like in my world, like if I lived in the world where Antichrist appeared, what would I do? And as I examine that, I find it frightening, because you think about it, the whole world is going to go after him. The whole world means everyone around you, for the most part. I mean, maybe not everyone, but I mean that sort of idiomatic everyone. Like everyone's going after him. Everyone is going to worship him. The whole world. For all practical purposes, you're going to feel incredibly isolated, incredibly alone. Family members are going to be turning against you. It's going to be very difficult. And all the pressure in the world is going to be on you to conform to the new world leader God. The new God of the world, who's going to be on the world, they'll be worshiping him as God. Because whatever they come up with, when they finally unify the world under one leader, that's almost certainly Antichrist. Or some sort of it is a kind of Antichrist. Especially if they start worshiping him. I mean, it's like, that's pretty obvious, right? Whatever form that takes, supernatural, natural, whatever, it doesn't, you got to be ready for whatever goes on, because it's not so much, it is his miracles that convinces the world, but what will be the most pressure on you will be just the whole world coming down on you. What do you mean? And it's very difficult to, try to put your mind in that space where literally everything around you, the idea that you're going to be able to resist that, I tell you, you don't have what it takes. You need the Spirit of God. That's the only thing that's going to keep us in the time of the end, is the Spirit of God. That's why we exercise ourselves every day in the Word. That's why we exercise ourselves by seeking the Spirit and looking to him. What shall I do? What shall I do? Where shall I go? What is the course of action I should take? You practice that every day. You should practice it. Consulting, turning your mind towards Christ to know where you ought to turn. At least turn your mind towards him. Orient your thoughts to God. What should I do here? Because the more we do that, the more we are looking, when we're making our turns and we're adjusting where we're pointing our eyes and what we set our eyes upon, the more we set our eyes upon Jesus, the greater that habit is ingrained in us, the more certain it is that we have been following him in faith and that we have nothing to fear. So practice your Christianity now, and it will be, and you will be faithful to it no matter what the temptation. Because believe me, those who have not followed him, those who have not truly put their faith in him and trusted him. It's like when I put my trust in him, it's like when I say, Lord, where shall I turn now? When I look to him, when I ask him in